The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Medical Center cast harsh shadows across the chemotherapy ward as Dr. Elena Vasquez Thompson settled into the familiar vinyl chair for her third round of treatment. At 34, she should have been in the prime of her life, not fighting stage 2 breast cancer while watching her marriage crumble before her eyes. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was receiving treatment in the very hospital she secretly owned, a fact known only to her late father's attorney and a handful of trusted board members. Elena had inherited St. Catherine's Medical Center 2 years ago when her father, renowned philanthropist and healthcare mogul Dr. Carlos Vasquez, died in a tragic helicopter accident. But she'd kept her ownership hidden, preferring to work as a practicing oncologist rather than sit in boardrooms. The hospital's board respected her wishes for anonymity, allowing her to continue her medical career while they handled daily operations. She'd wanted to tell her husband David about the inheritance, but their relationship had already begun deteriorating, and she decided to wait for the right moment, a moment that never came. Now, as the toxic chemicals dripped into her veins through the IV port, Elena closed her eyes and tried to focus on healing rather than the betrayal that had become her daily reality. David Thompson, her husband of 6 years, had made it abundantly clear that her cancer diagnosis was an inconvenience he could barely tolerate. What he didn't know was that his wife wasn't just another patient in this hospital. She was the woman who signed the paychecks of every doctor, nurse, and administrator working to save her life. The sound of familiar laughter in the hallway made Elena's stomach clench with dread. She recognized that laugh, David's fake, charming chuckle that he used when he was trying to impress someone. The same laugh that had once made her heart flutter during their courtship, but now filled her with nausea that had nothing to do with chemotherapy. "I know this is difficult, babe, but we need to talk about practical matters," David's voice carried through the thin walls as he approached her treatment room. "The medical bills are piling up, and honestly, I don't know if we can afford to keep this up much longer." Elena's eyes flew open as David entered the room, but what she saw made her blood pressure spike so dramatically that her monitors began beeping in alarm. Behind her husband walked a stunning blonde woman in her mid-20s, wearing designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The woman's perfectly manicured hand rested possessively on David's arm as she surveyed the sterile medical environment with obvious distaste. "David," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse from the anti-nausea medications. "What is she doing here?" David had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly 3 seconds before his expression hardened into the cold mask she'd grown accustomed to over the past 6 months. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Sophia. We've been seeing each other." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, even though she'd suspected for weeks. Finding lipstick that wasn't hers in his car, the late nights at business meetings, the way he flinched when she tried to touch him. All the classic signs had been there. But bringing his mistress to her cancer treatment was a level of cruelty she hadn't imagined even David was capable of. Sophia stepped forward with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Hi, Elena. David's told me so much about you. I'm really sorry about your situation." Her eyes swept over the IV poles and medical equipment with poorly concealed revulsion. "My situation," Elena repeated faintly. "You mean my cancer?" "Well, yes," Sophia said, settling into the chair usually reserved for supportive family members. "It must be so hard being sick all the time. David's been under tremendous stress, you know. That's actually why I'm here. We wanted to discuss the future." Elena stared at her husband in disbelief. "You brought your mistress to my chemotherapy session to discuss the future." David shifted uncomfortably but stood his ground. "Elena, be reasonable. You've been sick for 8 months. The treatment isn't working as well as we hoped, and frankly, I need to think about my own happiness. Sophia and I are in love." "Your own happiness," Elena repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "During my cancer treatment." "Life doesn't stop because you're sick," David said defensively. "I've been supportive, haven't I? I drove you to your first few appointments." Alina almost laughed at the absurdity of it. David had driven her to exactly 3 appointments before declaring that he couldn't handle all the medical stuff, and that she should take an Uber or ask her friend Maria for rides. He'd missed every consultation with her oncologist, skipped every scan result meeting, and had never once stayed with her during the grueling chemotherapy sessions that left her weak and nauseated for days. "Supportive," Alina murmured. "Is that what you call this?" Sophia leaned forward, her voice taking on what she probably thought was a caring tone. "Alina, David and I have talked about this extensively. We think it would be best if you moved out of the house. The stress of your illness is affecting David's mental health, and honestly, it's not fair to either of us." The monitors around Alina's bed began beeping more insistently as her vital signs spiked. A nurse appeared in the doorway, Margaret Chen, a 20-year veteran of the oncology ward whom Alina had personally recommended for promotion to head nurse just 6 months ago. "Is everything all right in here?" Margaret asked, her trained eyes quickly assessing Alina's condition before turning to study the visitors. "Mrs. Thompson, your blood pressure is elevated. Are you experiencing any discomfort?" "Just some unexpected visitors," Alina managed, trying to regain her composure. Margaret's gaze sharpened as she took in the scene, the patient clearly in distress. The uncomfortable-looking man who was obviously the husband she'd heard other nurses complaining about, and the overdressed young woman who had no business being in a chemotherapy ward. "I'm sorry," Margaret said firmly, "but we have strict policies about visitors during treatment. Only immediate family members are allowed, and visiting hours are limited to ensure our patients can rest and heal properly." Sophia bristled. "I'm David's girlfriend. We're practically family." "Actually," Margaret replied with the authority that came from 2 decades of dealing with difficult families, "you're not family at all. And Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you to keep your voices down. This is a medical facility, not a place for personal drama." David's face flushed red. "Now listen here, nurse. You can't tell us what to do. This is my wife, and I have every right to be here." Margaret's expression remained professionally neutral, but Alina caught the flash of anger in her eyes. "Sir, you have the right to visit your wife during appropriate hours and in a manner that supports her healing. What you're doing right now is causing her significant stress during a medical procedure. I'm going to have to ask your friend to leave immediately." "You can't throw us out," Sophia protested, standing up and crossing her arms. "Do you know who David is? He's a successful real estate developer. He has connections in this city." Margaret almost smiled at that. "Ma'am, I've been working in this hospital for 20 years. I've seen every type of family drama you can imagine, and I can assure you that your boyfriend's profession doesn't give him special privileges to upset cancer patients during treatment." Alina watched the confrontation with a mixture of fascination and growing anger. Margaret didn't know that Alina owned the hospital, but she was defending her patient with the fierce protectiveness that made her an exceptional nurse. Meanwhile, David and his mistress were behaving like entitled children who'd never been told no in their lives. "This is ridiculous," David snapped. "Alina, tell your nurse that we're allowed to be here." For the first time in months, Alina felt a spark of her old fire returning. "Actually, David, Margaret is right. This is a medical facility, and I'm receiving treatment for a life-threatening illness. If you can't be supportive, then you shouldn't be here at all." "Supportive?" David's voice rose. "I've been nothing but supportive. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone who's sick all the time? The medical bills are astronomical, Alina. We're going to lose the house if this keeps up." Alina's eyes narrowed. "What medical bills? My insurance covers everything." "Your insurance covers the basics," David said dismissively. "But we're talking about experimental treatments, private rooms, the best doctors." "David," Alina interrupted quietly, "I haven't asked for any experimental treatments. I've been receiving standard chemotherapy in a semi-private room, and my oncologist is excellent but not the most expensive in the city. What bills are you talking about?" For a moment, David looked genuinely confused, as if he'd been caught in a lie he'd started believing himself. Well, there are costs, indirect costs. I've had to miss work to deal with all this medical stuff. You haven't missed a single day of work, Alina pointed out. You've missed my appointments, but you've never missed work. Margaret cleared her throat. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Thompson's treatment needs to continue uninterrupted. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to have to insist that you and your companion leave now. You can visit during regular hours if you can do so without causing distress to the patient. Sophia grabbed David's arm. Come on, baby, let's go. This place is depressing anyway. But David wasn't finished. Alina, we need to have a serious conversation about our future. I can't keep living like this. Sophia and I are planning to move in together, and you need to start making arrangements for your own living situation. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Alina stared at her husband, the man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. The naive part of her that had still hoped their marriage could survive her illness finally died in that sterile treatment room. You want me to move out, Alina said slowly, while I'm undergoing chemotherapy for breast cancer. It's not personal, Alina, Sophia chimed in helpfully. It's just that sick people have such negative energy, you know. David needs positivity in his life right now. Margaret stepped forward, her professional composure finally cracking. That is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in 20 years of nursing. Ma'am, you need to leave this hospital immediately, and sir, you should be ashamed of yourself. Don't you dare lecture us, David snarled. You're just a nurse. You don't understand complex adult relationships. That was the moment Alina's composure finally shattered completely. The stress, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of bringing his mistress to mock her during treatment. It all crystallized into a fury so pure it burned away her nausea and weakness. Margaret, Alina said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room freeze. Would you please call security and have Mr. Thompson and his companion escorted from the hospital? Alina, you can't throw me out, David protested. I'm your husband. Actually, Alina continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I can do exactly that. Margaret, while you're calling security, would you also please ask Dr. Harrison to come to my room and ask him to bring the hospital administrator? Margaret looked confused but nodded. Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Should I tell them what this is regarding? Alina looked directly at David, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in their entire relationship. Tell them that the owner of St. Catherine's Medical Center needs to discuss a security issue. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went through several color changes as he processed what Alina had just said. What did you just say? He whispered. I said I own this hospital, David. St. Catherine's Medical Center, all 4 buildings, the research wing, the cancer treatment center where I'm currently receiving chemotherapy. I own all of it. Sophia laughed nervously. That's impossible, you're just a doctor. I'm an oncologist who inherited a hospital, Alina corrected. When my father died 2 years ago, he left me St. Catherine's along with a trust fund worth approximately $200 million. I chose to continue practicing medicine rather than focusing on administration, but make no mistake, every person in this building works for me. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible. You would have told me. We're married. Are we? Alina asked. Because married people don't bring their mistresses to their spouse's cancer treatment. Married people don't talk about moving in with their girlfriends while their wife is fighting for her life. And married people certainly don't complain about medical bills when their spouse owns the hospital. Margaret was staring at Alina with newfound respect and understanding. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Why Alina always seemed to know so much about hospital policies, why the board members greeted her so respectfully, why she'd been able to get Margaret promoted so quickly. Mrs. Thompson, Margaret said carefully, I mean Dr. Vasquez. Should I still call security? Oh yes, Alina said firmly. And Margaret, my married name is Thompson, but you're right. I prefer Dr. Vasquez. I think it's time I went back to using my maiden name professionally and personally. David finally found his voice. Elena, wait. Let's talk about this rationally. I had no idea about the hospital, about the money, if I'd known. If you'd known, you would have treated me differently, Elena finished. You would have been supportive during my cancer treatment if you'd known I was wealthy. You would have loved me in sickness and in health if you'd known I owned a hospital. That's not what I meant, David said desperately, but they both knew it was exactly what he meant. Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, followed by James Mueller, the hospital administrator. Both men looked concerned until they saw Elena, and their expressions immediately shifted to respectful attention. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Harrison said warmly, Margaret said you needed to see us. Is everything all right? Elena gestured toward David and Sophia. I need these people removed from the hospital permanently. They're banned from the premises effective immediately. David stepped forward desperately. Wait, you can't do this. Elena, I'm your husband. We need to talk about this privately. James Mueller looked between Elena and David with understanding dawning in his eyes. Sir, if the owner of this hospital is asking you to leave, then you need to leave immediately. Security is already on their way. The owner, Sophia shrieked. She's lying, she's just trying to embarrass us. Dr. Harrison looked at Sophia with the same expression he might use for a particularly unpleasant tumor. Ma'am, I've known Dr. Vasquez for years. She's not only one of our finest oncologists, but she's also the majority owner of St. Catherine's Medical Center. If she says you're banned from the premises, then you're banned. Two security guards appeared in the doorway, and Elena felt a wave of satisfaction as she recognized them. Tom Rodriguez had worked security at St. Catherine's for 15 years, and his daughter had been treated in Elena's pediatric oncology program 3 years ago. He took one look at the situation and immediately understood what was happening. Dr. Vasquez, Tom said respectfully, is there a problem here? Yes, Tom. Mr. Thompson and his companion are no longer welcome in this hospital. Please escort them out and make sure they understand they're banned from all St. Catherine's facilities. David made one last desperate attempt. Elena, please, let's go home and discuss this privately. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. Elena looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, with a mixture of pity and disgust. David, the only mistake I made was not seeing your true character sooner. You've shown me exactly who you are when I needed you most. There's nothing left to discuss. But the money, David blurted out. I mean our marriage, our life together, this changes everything. Yes, Elena agreed. It does change everything. It shows me that you never loved me at all, you just didn't know how much I was worth. As security escorted David and Sophia from the room, Elena could hear Sophia's voice echoing down the hallway. This can't be legal. You can't just throw people out of a hospital. Tom's voice carried back clearly. Ma'am, Dr. Vasquez owns this hospital. She can absolutely have you removed from her private property. After they left, Elena sank back into her treatment chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her weak and shaky. Margaret immediately checked Elena's vital signs, noting that her blood pressure was finally returning to normal. Dr. Vasquez, are you all right? Should I call Dr. Harrison back? I'm fine, Margaret. Actually, I'm better than I've been in months. Elena managed a weak smile. Thank you for standing up for me before you even knew who I was. Margaret squeezed Elena's hand gently. Honey, I would have stood up for you no matter who you were. What that man did was despicable, but knowing you own this place, well, it makes throwing him out a lot more satisfying. Elena laughed for the first time in weeks. I've been dreading telling people about the inheritance. I was afraid it would change how they treated me. The only thing it changes, Margaret said firmly, is that now I know why you always fight so hard for our patients. You're not just a doctor here, this is your life's work. Over the following weeks, as Elena continued her treatment, word spread through the hospital about what had happened. The story became legend. The devoted doctor who secretly owned the hospital, the cruel husband who abandoned her during cancer treatment, and the mistress who got banned from the premises for calling chemotherapy patients negative energy. Elena's oncology colleagues rallied around her with unprecedented support. Nurses who had always respected her professionally now understood why she fought so passionately for patient care improvements. The hospital staff, from janitors to surgeons, seemed to take personal pride in ensuring Elena received the best possible care. Dr. Harrison visited Elena during one of her treatments, bringing news that made her smile for the first time since her diagnosis. "Elena, I wanted to update you on some personnel changes we're making. Margaret Chen has been promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy, and we're implementing new policies about visitor conduct during treatment. No patient should ever have to endure what you went through." "That's wonderful news about Margaret," Elena said. "She deserves recognition for her dedication." "There's something else," Dr. Harrison continued. "David Thompson has been trying to get information about your treatment schedule. He's called the hospital multiple times, claiming spousal rights to medical information." Elena's expression hardened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. HIPAA protects your privacy regardless of marital status. But I wanted you to know that our legal team has made it clear to Mr. Thompson that any further contact will be considered harassment." 3 months later, Elena received news that her latest scans showed significant improvement. The tumors were shrinking, and her prognosis had improved dramatically. Dr. Harrison attributed her recovery not just to the treatment, but to the reduced stress in her life. "Sometimes," he told her, "the best medicine is removing toxic people from your environment." Elena had to agree. With David out of her life, she'd been able to focus entirely on healing. She'd moved into a beautiful apartment near the hospital, started attending support groups, and reconnected with friends David had systematically isolated her from over the years. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. David's attorney initially demanded half of Elena's assets, claiming he deserved compensation for supporting her through her illness. Elena's legal team presented evidence of David's affair, his abandonment during treatment, and his attempt to force her from their home while she was undergoing chemotherapy. The judge was not sympathetic to David's case. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Patricia Wells said during the final hearing, "you brought your mistress to your wife's cancer treatment and demanded she move out of your shared home while fighting a life-threatening illness. The court finds your behavior not only morally reprehensible but legally actionable. You will receive nothing from this marriage except the obligation to pay your wife's legal fees." Elena walked out of the courthouse a free woman, both legally and emotionally. 6 months after her final chemotherapy treatment, Elena stood in the boardroom of St. Catherine's Medical Center, addressing the full board of directors for the first time since inheriting the hospital. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I've spent the past 2 years learning this institution from the ground up, not as an owner, but as a physician and a patient. That experience has given me insights I never could have gained from financial reports or administrative meetings." She outlined her vision for expanding patient advocacy programs, improving family support services, and creating new policies to protect vulnerable patients from the kind of abuse she'd experienced. "We're going to make St. Catherine's a place where healing happens not just in the body, but in the spirit," Elena concluded. "Where families are supported through their darkest hours, and where no patient ever has to face their battles alone." The board approved her initiatives unanimously. As Elena left the hospital that evening, Margaret caught up with her in the parking garage. "Dr. Vasquez, I wanted to thank you for the promotion and for everything you're doing for patient advocacy." Elena smiled. "Margaret, you earned that promotion long before I got involved. You stood up for a patient when she needed it most, without knowing anything except that it was the right thing to do. That's the kind of leadership this hospital needs." "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said. "Do you ever regret not telling David about the inheritance earlier, maybe if he'd known?" Elena considered the question seriously. Margaret, if David had known about the money, he might have stayed. He might have pretended to be supportive. But his true character was revealed when he thought I was just a sick doctor with no money and no power. In a way, cancer gave me the gift of seeing who people really are when everything else is stripped away. And what did you see? Elena looked back at the hospital where she'd fought for her life and discovered her strength. I saw that family isn't always about blood or marriage vows. Sometimes family is the nurse who protects you during your darkest hour, the colleagues who rally around you, the institution that becomes your life's work. She paused, watching the lights come on in the windows of the cancer ward, where other patients were beginning their own battles. David thought my cancer made me weak and worthless, but it actually showed me how strong I really am. Strong enough to own a hospital, strong enough to leave a toxic marriage, and strong enough to make sure no other patient has to face what I faced. As Elena drove home to her new life, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this point. David's cruelty had been the catalyst for her to claim her power and her identity. His betrayal had freed her to become the leader she was meant to be. The last she'd heard, David and Sophia had broken up within 3 months of being banned from the hospital. Apparently, Sophia's interest in David had diminished considerably once she realized he wasn't going to gain access to Elena's fortune. David had tried reaching out through mutual friends, claiming he'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to reconcile. Elena's response had been simple. Some mistakes can't be forgiven. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some people show you exactly who they are, and you should believe them. Now, as she pulled into the driveway of her beautiful new home, Elena felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Her cancer was in remission, her hospital was thriving under her leadership, and her life was finally, truly her own. The girl who had hidden her inheritance out of fear had become a woman who wielded her power with wisdom and compassion. And sometimes, late at night, she would smile thinking about the look on David's face when he realized he'd thrown away not just a loving wife, but a fortune he never deserved in the first place. Justice, Elena had learned, sometimes came in the form of a hospital ID badge and the authority to ban toxic people from your life forever.